Good afternoon, everybody. Welcome to today's webinar. My name's Natalie Bungay, and today we're going to be talking about guidance on the CRRU stewardship for rodenticide. Hopefully you can all hear me okay and see me okay. Just as a usual quick FYIs and a bit of a guidance on how you can get the most out of today. If you have any technology problems, so sound or visual issues, then we've got a chat section. A few of you have been popping some bits in there already. That's great. See you telling me where you all are, and we're spread around the UK certainly. But that section is great for that. Have a chat there, but also use it if you have any issues with the technology, so sound or visual. And my colleague Kat is there to help out and give you any advice if that was to happen. We have a Q&A section at the end. So once I'm done with the webinar today, I will invite you to, test me with your questions and chuck some out there, and I'll do my absolute best to answer them as thoroughly as possible. But that's a Q&A section. So please don't put your questions to me in the chat section. Just put it in the Q&A, and then at the end, I'll pop that up and I'll read them out. You can be anonymous, you can give me a name, it's completely up to you. If you do pop your name on there, I'll probably read it out. So just to give you a shout out, okay. So we like those questions coming in, and because CRRU, all the stewardship, the guidance on it, the code of practice, things like that, I'm sure you've all got lots of questions already, and possibly some of the bits I'll be covering today might also ignite those questions for you. So please, again, I encourage that. So that's the chat section, that's Q&A bit. Again, I can't hear you or see you or anything like that. I know you can hear me and see me, but yeah, don't start waving at me because I can't see you there. So to go back to the topic then, so the CRRU stewardship, really, I've got an hour today. It's a really big subject. There's so much about the stewardship that you can go for extra reading on. But I wanted to be able to focus on the, when you're out in the field, what you're doing, and hopefully that be of some use to you. So I'm just going to start sharing my screen because I want to bring up the agenda for you. I'm going to get my colleague Kat to shout to me in case there's any screen issues, but unless I hear nothing, I will assume that's showing fine. So guidance on the CRRU stewardship for rodenticide use. What we are going to be covering, timeline. I want to use today to talk about the practical implementation. One of my favourite phrases, I know, but that's what's going to be important to those of you watching today. I'm making assumptions that everyone here today does some form of practical rodent control outside. So we're going to be focusing on that. But I will do a quick stewardship timeline, a bit of an update on it, just to get us all thinking and our juices flowing. We're going to talk about the risk hierarchy, really key, really important part of the stewardship. And then, of course, pre-treatment, during treatment, and post-treatment. So they're the areas that we want to cover. There's lots of subjects I'm probably not going to be touching on because there's a lot to it. But please, use the Q&A section if you do have any questions about things that I haven't covered. And if I don't get to them, if I get a lot of questions, which I'm hoping, there's a chance I'm not going to be able to get to them all live here, but as always, I will log off afterwards, print out those questions, do some type outs to them and send them out an email, or at least Kat, my colleague, will help me with that. So we will do it. Please get those questions in there, okay? But this is what we're going to be covering today. Fabulous. Okay, so without further ado, I'm making assumptions that everyone can see okay. I just need to move my screen around a bit because I can see my face right in the middle of there and it's not overly pleasant. Okay, apologies here. This isn't working very well. You're used to me, aren't you? You can just bear with me. You're like, it's fine, Natalie. Don't worry, take your time. Okay. So again, timeline. I don't want to spend too much time on this, but European Commission, basically there was a report that detailed, it was a very large report, it was over 100 pages, but it did detail resistance in rats and mice to first generation and second generation anticoagulants. They also covered like product authorizations and also the exposure to rodenticides by humans, pets and wildlife. And this resulting in recommendations really for the purpose of resistance and secondary poisoning mitigation measures. So they wanted to put together a big report to be able to reduce the problems that rodenticides expose to various areas, but resistance and also secondary poisoning issues there. So that report was put together. And then in 2014, the risk assessment was carried out by the regulators for the UK, the HSE, or the Health and Safety Executive. And that has shown that anticoagulants present a higher risk to people and non-target animals than is normally acceptable. HSE authorise pesticides, including rodenticides in Great Britain and Northern Ireland. Now, the risks that these anticoagulants pose to people and non-target animals is pretty high. And normally they would just say, we're not authorising those products because, those risks are so high. However, the HSE did recognise and also decided that because there are no equally effective and safer methods for, rodent pest management, and because their removal from the market would result in an unacceptable risks to humans and animal health, anticoagulants can continue to be authorised for sale and use in the UK and Northern Ireland. However, a scheme of stewardship needed and must be implemented on a voluntary basis, and this was to reduce the risks to the environment and provide HSE with the confidence that it requires to permit really their continued use. So we've had this period, from 2015 when it really started coming into effect up to now, 6 years later, we've had this period of time to really, convince the HSE that, we can properly manage not just professional pest controllers, obviously as farmers, gamekeepers, to be able to effectively manage this risk that they see as unacceptable. But again, they are keen, so let's not go HSE bashing. They are keen to keep them. They want to. They know they're useful. They know that we need them in many situations, but we need to control the use. Okay, and maybe not be as haphazard as maybe the perception was before all of this. So of course the CRRU stewardship was born in 2015. That's the basic timeline there. The code of practice was developed and then implemented. We're all familiar with this. The most recent one was very recent, so July 2021. It's mostly the same throughout. There's a few additions. As we know, there's been some other active ingredients that have come out that are now in this guidance document. And I implore you after today to go and have a read, because it's a fair few pages long. And of course, I can't cover it all today. I'm just doing the really important bits. So this was implemented. This was drawn up, agreed on, and then released to the industry. There was also product labels did need to start changing as well. They needed to consider product labels because there's an important legal aspect there, which I'll go into a little bit in a moment. And the document library was also increased. You can see here, maybe a lot of you are familiar with this page, but as you can see, we've got the top here on the far right hand side, you've got downloads that you can click on. And that is where you will find everything and anything you want to read on. So, of course, the code of practice, any of the reports on, you can see there, second generation anticoagulant rodenticide residues in Barnes Owl 2019. So there's 2020 as well. There's been different reports. There's resistance reports, got environmental risk assessment guidance and templates. There's all sorts of documents here. So again, if you're not familiar with this page, I do implore you to use it. And you know what? Another really great thing is that you can get some CPD points for that. Just as a reminder to everybody here, I actually purposely waited till now to mention CPD points because usually people miss it at the beginning, but you're all going to get one for today. So if you've pre-registered for this and you popped in your details, you will get 1 point allocated to your account. If you're watching it later on, then by all means, please go and register that yourself. But you get 1 point for today. And things like this, the downloads on the CRRU website, if you download anything here and you read through it, you will get CPD points for that. You just need to tell your relevant scheme. Your technicians, if you use it in a team meeting and say, right, we're going to have a chat about the CRRU code, or we're going to look at environmental risk assessment guidance, really great CPD. And if you spend a couple of hours on it, it's a couple of points, isn't it? So implore you to do that. So, we've got the code of practice, we've got the information getting out there, we've got some good downloads as well. The next thing to really happen, now this is a relatively old diagram here with regards to the timeline that happened with product labels. Again, this is just an FYI, just to remind us all what happened and what's the case now. But we did have labels that didn't mention that the users of those professional use products had to follow any particular code or guidance. There was no requirement for having a qualification or having that proof of competence. As we now know, those of us that have got, diploma part 1 or the level 2 pest management was always compliant in terms of the labels we've got now. But if you haven't got that, as a minimum, you need the various names for it, but a CRRU approved rodent control qualification, usually to level 2 standard. That's a legal requirement. But from August 2015, we did have products that didn't need proof of competence. So you didn't need to prove that you were qualified, and there wasn't any statements on there saying you must follow codes of practice or guidance or anything like that. And then we did also have products that. So we had products that weren't going to be renewed, and then we had products that were going to be renewed. Now, these all had different timelines, but really the important thing is that April 2017, all of the products that had old labels that didn't mention anything about CRRU or following the code of practice or the guidance was now gone. So April 2017. But yet between we did have a period of time there between April 2016 and April 2017 where we had 2 types of labels. We had some rodenticides that had labels that were kind of didn't need to prove competence to use it, and we also had some new labels coming through authorization that did say you had to have competence. That's the nature of the beast, if you like. Approvals take a long time, they cost a lot of money. Manufacturers, spend a lot of time and a lot of money on these things, and the HSE have to approve them. In this period of time, as you can see here, there's an overlap. But from April 2017, all the rodenticides we got went through the biocidal product regulations, and they have this statement on. It varies, I think, in terms of exact wording, but generally the typical label statement will be, to be used only by professional users holding certification demonstrating compliance with UK rodenticide stewardship regime requirements. Blimey, that was a long sentence, wasn't it? Now, I've seen a lot of them, actually, they do mention the CRRU name, they mention the code of practice name, but they all mean the same thing. You have got to comply with the CRRU stewardship regime to be able to be a professional, competent and legal user of these authorized rodenticides. Now, I'm kind of focusing on that because it's really important, especially when maybe we might touch on, going to touch on environmental risk assessments. This statement being on a product label makes it a legal requirement under the biocidal product regulations to follow that guidance. It's not just if I've got time, or if I think about it enough, or if I've charged enough for the work, I'll do all of these environmental risk assessments or whatever. It's non-negotiable. It's you will do it if you're using professional use rodenticides with this statement on the label. Legal requirement. Okay, so that's, as I said, be relatively brief. I think it was brief. Yeah, it's nice, 15 minutes there. Any more questions on that, please pop them in the Q&A bit, but I'm not going to do anything more about the timeline and what's happened and why it happened and how it happened. Okay, I think we've had a lot of that over the years. So the practical implementation side of things. Now, as I said, the CRRU code, I am not going to be able to cover every single aspect in that code. I just haven't got time for that. My employee said to go and have a read of it, but I'm going to cover the important bits that are really key for you to remember when you're out and about. So the CRRU risk hierarchy, or the hierarchy of controls, different terms, but this is really important, and it's good to have this visual representation in your mind at all times when you're considering any form of treating rats outside with rodenticide, or say with rodenticide generally. This is the hierarchy you will follow. And the concept is that those intending to use any rodent control methods or a combination, so integrated pest management, need to consider their risks first. These include, risk to humans, domesticated animals, non-target animals, and also the environment. It's key to remember risks will differ between, situations in which, you need to control rats outside. It might be, if you're working in a rural situation, a urban situation, or even a suburban situation, they will have different levels of risk and different requirements in terms of maybe documentation or considerations. But this risk hierarchy, the important thing is that it requires that the least severe method should be used or needs to be used, provided that there is a reasonable expectation that the resultant operation will achieve the results required. So, of course, if you think, okay, well, I'm doing all of these, non-toxic stuff, I'm removing harborage, I'm giving recommendations, and I'm doing some proofing and doing a bit of trapping. But actually, if these things don't result in a eradication of the problem or control of that rat problem, then of course you need to move on to perceived more high risk elements, but you need to make sure you mitigate those risks. Okay, so moving into rodenticide, we need to make sure we mitigate those. Generally, those methods that do not apply generally those methods that do not employ a rodenticide, such as I said, improved hygiene and that, are likely to prevent less habits. You need to think about, if you're doing trapping though, you still need to think about the risks there. I had some great discussions yesterday with lots of groups of pest controllers about using traps and finding that actually you have non-target species going into those traps sometimes, and what to do about those things. And it really is up to you to weigh up the risks if you're catching, or if you catch anything that possibly is attracted to that trap, and maybe putting a block non-toxic monitoring device down would actually be better, then again, consider that. But it really is up to you. There is no one answer. There is no, regardless of what site you work on, this is what you do. That doesn't exist. It really is site specific. But, of course, you've still got to consider your risk assessments with regards to trapping for those bits. So with regards to an environmental risk assessment, it's in section 7, I think it is, of the Code of Practice, really important to read, needs to be conducted before application of rodent control measures when you're considering the hierarchy. So you'll always be doing it. We're doing it mentally to go around. I call it a dynamic environmental risk assessment. We're always doing these things. We're advising customers of, removal of harborage and, clear that food up, because that's part of the integrated pest management. That's part of the control program. And what also do you do with that? Let's say, you do some work and you're using completely non-toxic controls and you're not using rodenticide. The one thing we always give the customer is a treatment report, isn't it? And I'm a real big advocate of using a treatment report to its fullest potential. And for me, again, I was talking about this yesterday, but everything you look at, everything you see, everything you do, everything you advise, you need to write down in that treatment report, because it is a reflection on you professionally, but also it does form a part of protection for you and evidence that you're doing the things you should. So your treatment report is really vital. And if you don't already have a template that allows for you to do things like, environmental risk assessing or demonstrating that you're thinking about it and you're doing it, then I recommend you, trying to adapt your template so that you can include that on there, site by site by site, not just, I'm going to get big customers or the customers that are paying me a lot of money. It's got to be, every single time, any single time that you're out there and you're considering doing rat control outside. Okay. So yes, that's the hierarchy. Keep it in mind. Of course, we've got, I don't know, maybe some of you might be thinking, glue sticky boards outside. So if you read the Code of Practice, it basically says, not for use, not using them outside and usually inside. And it's more of a mention rather than an actual control measure, but it could still be a consideration. You may have rats that are outside, but maybe also going inside, and you've got that dual there. So possibly it could be part of your treatment plan. But again, it is in the CRRU code. That's why I've got it in there. It is a consideration if you've got two environmental situations, again, inside, outside, maybe you would consider them. But of course, let's not go catching anything we shouldn't. Let's not go there. That's not today's talk, is it? Great. So crew risk hierarchy, really important. Drill it in there, make sure you do them, and all will be relatively well. So that's the principles to it. That's the things you've got to always have in your mind. So when you actually get to that job, the pre-treatment side of things. Section 5 in the Code of Practice, is a title there, what to do before treatment. Again, please go and have, some extra reading on that, extracurricular activities. But the basics are that these need to be around the other way. So I did change them, but my presentation didn't save. So you need to do a survey first. The survey here is certainly the most important thing. Basically, much can be done prior to, a rodent infestation becoming established. Before a rodent infestation occurs, you can make their occurrence less likely. So, if precautionary measures such as proofing and hygiene, which we discussed in the previous slide, are rigorously implemented, then rodent infestations will be pretty infrequent, or maybe even if they're not infrequent, at least small and easier to deal with. So it's really important that survey that you do, flags up those things. When you're doing your routine visits on sites where maybe you get regular-ish problems, that survey is really important, because that's what can, make rodent infestations that maybe do occur less problematic, smaller in size, easier to deal with. The harder we make something to establish itself, the less likely they're going to, or if they do, of course, their population size will be smaller. So, because, again, generally small infestations of rats and mice can often be removed, using physical means. Again, traps are quite a good idea, and environmental conditions. It really is important for you to recognise that, when we turn up to sites and we've got just a slight bit of activity that's occurred for whatever reason, many reasons, maybe, think about, are you actually putting in enough rodent control measures for that. So we're going to talk about risk assessments. Now, just before we do that, I was going to do this at the beginning, but I changed my mind at the last minute, so I'm going to do it now. I'm going to be talking about environmental risk assessments. My colleague Kat is going to pop up a poll now for everybody to consider and have a look at the question that we've got on there with regards to environmental risk assessments. So basically it is, I want to know for you, in your opinion right now, do you carry out environmental risk assessments every time you are required to? Okay, every single time. Because I'm doing this because I want to know before I go into the whole, let's talk about environmental risk assessments a bit more. Because afterwards, maybe it'd be a different view. Okay, but getting some good choices here. We've got another couple, leave it another couple of seconds. Go on everybody's opportunity. We've got 300 participants with us today viewing. So really great number there, and I thought maybe it would be because the stewardship and environmental risk assessments and rodent control outside is always something we're worried about. So good to see that, all 301 of you now are with us today. Okay, I'm going to end the poll. Just give you 2 more seconds. 1, 2. There we go. Let's end the poll now. I'm going to share the results. So at the moment, everyone's telling me that. So 61% of you do it every time. Great. 29% of you most of the time, and 9% some of the time, and 1% never. So we've got, I'm going to impress you, some quick maths. We've got 39% that don't do it every single time. That was impressive, wasn't it? So yeah, most people do it every single time. But I'll just be interested to see. We're going to do this poll again at the end, and then maybe those numbers have changed a little bit, because do you do it every time? Okay, I'm just going to go into that. Right, I'm going to close have I shared the results with you? Oh, no, there we go. I'm sharing it with you. It's a bit selfish of me, wasn't it? Keeping all those exciting stats to myself. So yeah, good. 61% of us every single time. Another part, I'm going to close this poll now. Another part of the whole HSE crew thing, a really important part as well, is not just the competency and the safe use. That's obviously the important part, but also attitude, so that the users of these products have the attitude change from what it used to be to a more positive one. So I'm paraphrasing here. This is me surmising here, but the attitude used to be, well, I've talked to there's rats there, I'm going to put poison there. What's the problem with that? That's what I've been doing for years. It's worked. I haven't seen any problems. And, the attitude was quite, really a stewardship, and we have to do all these things, and quite downbeat about everything was happening. So HSE really, really want to see an attitude change there as well, with regards to actually, this is a great thing. And yeah, we're on board with this. And actually that improves our industry and creates more professionalism. So, that's something to be able to think about, and to think about yourself. I'm not going to ask you, but what you really feel your attitude is towards this, and what maybe your colleagues' attitude is towards the whole stewardship and risk assessing. So this survey, going back to what I was talking about, the survey forms a really big part. How do you record your survey? You'll decide. You might be doing a one-off job at Joe Bloggs' house, never been there before. It's a brand new site. It's just a few rats in the garden. You can see some harbourage. Seems pretty easy and straightforward. Let's say you've got 7 of those in one day. Are you going to fill out a really big environmental risk assessment form on every single one when you go? Up to you whether you do. But actually, as I mentioned before, your treatment report can really be a great tool for you to demonstrate that you're doing an environmental risk assessment. Because do you know what? I think 100% of you are doing it in here, that you're, going, okay, well, actually, yeah, this is an area with lots of birds of prey. And, I've seen lots of, foxes in the area, or, I'm considering, slugs getting into my boxes and trying to prevent that, so that, things like hedgehogs don't eat those slugs that contaminate you. You're kind of doing a lot of this stuff anyway. So write it on your treatment report, form it in a way that you can put that information on a treatment report, so it's there. Because if you were ever to be asked the difficult questions or investigated for any reason with regards to the rodent treatment you've done outside, then you're going to have to produce some evidence that you've done your environmental risk assessment, and you saying you've done it in your mind is not going to be enough, full stop. Now, again, I'm just spending 5 minutes on environmental risk assessments because it is really important. And this is why I asked the question before. Now, we say that, yeah, we do environmental risk assessment on every single time I'm supposed to. So, it's not just when you've got, substantial issues, or it's not just when you've got a site that's, particularly important to you. It is, it doesn't matter where you're doing that rodent control. You need to consider environmental risks, and you need to write it down somewhere. Again, if you're at Joe Bloggs' house doing, a job there, and you're at 7 other properties in the day, 10 other properties in the day doing rats outside, and you're possibly considering the use of rodenticides, you've got to make sure you follow that hierarchy. And if you do need to implement, the use of rodenticides, you've got to record what you're doing in terms of environmental risk assessment. You've got to write it down somewhere. You can use your treatment report for that. So good to think about that yourself. Is, am I, or are my colleagues, or are my technicians, are they doing that? Am I seeing, when they go to all these domestic calls every day, or maybe a load of commercial one-off calls, are they recording the things that they're doing on the treatment report in enough detail that they should be detailing there? Now, in terms of, there is a guidance document specifically on the environmental risk assessment. So you've got a template that CRRU provide, and you've also got a guidance. Now, you don't have to use the CRRU environmental risk assessment template. It's a great template. Have a look at it, see if it works for you. But if it doesn't, you might want to create your own template. You might, increase the size of your treatment report, especially if you've got an electronic treatment report, and you can manipulate what information you've got on there. You can do a great environmental risk assessment on there. The key is that you record it, that you write it down, you demonstrate that you are doing it. Okay, the template doesn't need to be a particular color in a particular font from a particular website. It can be whatever you want it to be, as long as it covers the important hierarchy of controls and then your mitigation measures to make sure it doesn't get where it's not meant to be. Okay, relatively straightforward. So ever think about that, are you genuinely doing your risk assessments for use of rodenticides outside in every single occasion that you should be? Okay, not just your commercial sites or your big sites. It's got to be every single occurrence. Okay, have a think back for that. So, and in terms, just to briefly touch on the CRRU guidance for environmental risk assessments, and what they say is that, quite interestingly enough, sites that, you have never been to before. So if you've got a brand new call out, or you've got a routine site that you do routine work on, you've never had rats outside and all of a sudden it occurs, any site that's new to you, or you've never done any rodent control outside before, definitely need to record a environmental risk assessment, again in a format that covers the subjects you need to cover, but you need to do an environmental risk assessment. And also remember, if you've got a site where you're doing regular ish control, and you've got an environmental risk assessment sitting there that's controlling the things you're doing and making sure you're doing what you need to do, if a technician changes, if say Bob moves on, and Natalie comes and fills in for Bob and takes over the site and starts doing rodent control, then I need to be aware of that environmental risk assessment. I need to really do one again myself, because remember, I'm the user of that rodenticide. It's not just up to my company to provide me with an environmental risk assessment to go, oh, okay, I'll follow that. I'm the user of that product. I need to make sure that I'm doing the survey, I'm doing the environmental risk assessment, I'm making sure the things that I'm doing is not preventing any issues of secondary poisoning or primary poisoning. So that's another time when you need to do an environmental risk assessment afresh, when a technician changes, or when a company changes. If you take over a site that a company previously ran and they've got a nice folder and they've got an environmental risk assessment in there, don't just adopt that. You've got to do your own one and do your own survey, do your own environmental risk assessment. Okay. And as I said, when it comes to those smaller, one-off, quicker jobs that are maybe a bit easier, a bit more straightforward to deal with, and it's going to be dealt with relatively quickly, if you are choosing to use control methods that you think might affect the environment, you need to write it down. Okay. Again, treatment report is such a great thing to utilize. Okay. And then also in there, the stewardship asks you to consider things like, the active substance and also the formulation. Some of us maybe have favorite ones. I say some of us, I haven't used them for a while, but some of you may have favorite products or active substances, is what that is. But are you really considering them properly, considering things like resistance in areas? Are you all aware of the rodenticide resistance action group and committees? They've got some great websites there, great information. We help a lot with that, and we try and make sure it's populated with information on areas around the UK that suffer from resistance from different products. I've got a list on my wall, hence if you wonder why I'm looking up, but it tells you whether or not first generation anticoagulants are appropriate in certain areas. There's a map that you can put your postcode in and have a good look around. So because these are reasons, aren't they, why you might start using rodenticide. If you've got a site where you're worried about trapping non-target species, or maybe meat feeders or something like that on traps that you might have in, you could be concerned about it. Or if all the proofing and recommendations you're doing, it'll have an impact, but it's not going to control the problem completely, and you need to use rodenticides, then you need to make sure you're considering those active substances and formulations to make sure you're going with the least hazardous and going through it. So it might be first generation, second generation, cholecalciferol. There's various options there. Okay. But consider it. Okay. Consider those active. Speak to your suppliers, have a chat to them. We all get feedback from various people about what's good, what doesn't work. But consider resistance, consider, other non-toxic control methods. And if you do need to use one of those anticoagulants, and consider them. Okay, just consider those levels, and of course label conditions. Follow the label. I'm not going to go on about that too much, because I generally do harp on about following label conditions, but I think we all know now that is certainly something that is very, very important. Okay, so overview, survey, do an environmental risk assessment, make sure you choose the right product and you read the label. Okay, simple stuff, pre-treatment things you need to do. And once you've decided on what you're going to do and you've done that environmental risk assessment, and for environmental risk assessment, it don't necessarily have to take you, 2 hours to do. Sometimes we get through it in 5-10 minutes in our minds, because we're so used to it. Professionals, we know what we've got to look for, right? Okay, yeah, I know the area, I know the resistance status, birds of prey or not birds of prey, and I'm not worried about this. I'll make sure I do that. I'll put that there. Great, off we go. Okay, you do it in quite a quick quick process because we're used to it, but just make sure, it's relevant to that site specific situation and you get it recorded in some way. Okay. So during treatment, so this really is completely extracted from the CRRU code. They list all of these things and they go into the code goes into a lot more detail on these items as well. But in that code, it tells you to consider integrated pest management. Now, you might be like, okay, you go for this code, and it's very interesting, or whatever. But why are you going into this detail? But remember, the labels, the product labels, the rodenticides that you're using say that you have to comply with the stewardship. You have to comply with this code of practice. So the detail is, in fact, very, very important. And in that document, it says, you need to consider integrated pest management. I think we all do it. And again, it's usually quite a quick thing. We need to cut that down. We need to seal that hole over there. We need to get rid of that harbridge. They need to put a grill on that or whatever. We're always doing it, aren't we? We're always doing integrated pest management. But again, are you demonstrating that on your paper? Are you putting that in your treatment report? You don't need to write War and Peace. It can be one line or one sentence. Tick boxes, I'm okay. We're okay with. I say I'm okay with. Who cares what Natalie thinks? The industry, we're okay with tick boxes, I think. But if you're ticking a box to say you've done something, think about whether you need extra detail to that. For example, if you're doing a risk assessment, a normal health and safety risk assessment or environmental risk assessment, and you tick that, oh yeah, there's dogs on the premises, great, and that's it. It doesn't tell anybody anything, does it? Other than, okay, you've noticed there's a problem here, but can't see you've done anything about it. So make sure if you use a tick box system, there's the ability to be able to say what you've done to mitigate that problem or issue, or or if you said, oh yeah, I've put some rodenticide down, so that's nice. How much have you put down? Where have you put it down? When are your follow-ups going to happen? Because you've got to come back regularly. Really important stuff. So consider IPM, consider resistance. I've mentioned that already. So just to reiterate, you can, have a look on the rodenticide resistance action group in the committee. They've got a map on there that you can utilize, and just to see whether or not there's been any reports of resistance in your area. If there are more tail samples that are required, I think you'll remember that possibly Reading University used to do this great work and test the samples of rat tails that were sent in for different strains of resistance. However, that unfortunately closed during lockdown, but it has been taken up again with the pace over in Cambridge. So again, the rodenticide resistance action group, you can get the information on submitting any rodent tails that you might be concerned about. If you think, oh, I might have some resistance in this area, you need to know about it because it's really important. So consider it. Have a look into it. Obviously, rodent behaviour. I think rodent behaviour is one of the most common things that us pest controllers are pretty great on, and knowing what they do, why they do it, and how they do it, because it helps us to decide what we're going to implement, what treatment we're going to implement. Okay, but all these things are in the CRRU code. All these things say you've got to consider IPM, you've got to consider the rodent behaviour and resistance, and bait placement. Really important. If you're going to be using rodenticide, that you're placing it as often as you need to, in the quantities you need to. You're not putting too little, or you're not putting too much. Possibly creating more environmental concerns. All these things. Bait placement is really important. Record keeping and monitoring. So record keeping, like I've mentioned, it's important. Treatment report, and I keep talking about a treatment report. The CRRU environmental risk assessment form, or if you've got one that you use, they are really useful things. And certainly, if you've got routine contract sites that you do any form of rodent control outside, I do recommend you have one of those standalone full risk assessment forms. Don't just rely on the treatment reports. Still use the treatment reports to be able to do some updates, and I've been back and looked for rodent carcasses or dead carcasses, and I've picked up 2 or haven't found any or whatever. And you're recording your regular recommendations, and people can see there's a trend of Natalie's on it, she's doing, telling people to do all these things. But I do recommend you have that standalone environmental assessment, and in many occasions it possibly would be expected as well. So just consider it. Whatever you do, it's got to be written down. Okay, just possibly it will increase, or the expectation will increase as the site maybe grows in size or complication, and so on and so forth, and regularity as well. So your record keeping and then monitoring. So, we can't just put these baits down and, come back when we fancy, or when the customer will let me. Crew code 28 days is the maximum. But if you've got a rat problem outside and you're doing an active treatment, you're not going to be coming back just every 28 days. You're going to be coming back weekly. Depends what active ingredient I guess you use. Some of the new ones, they've got to be a lot more regular than that. Again, follow label conditions, but you've got to be monitoring the situation. You've got to be coming back regularly, and looking at the risk mitigation measures you've got in place and going, yeah, this is still working. Yeah, I'm keeping everybody safe. I'm keeping the wildlife safe, but still dealing with the problem. Great. Okay. I always used to note that in my treatment report and be like, yeah, I've reconsidered X, Y, Z, and it's working great. I've done this, I've done that. I'll be back next week. So it can be brief in that term, but that can support a wider or larger environmental risk assessment on larger contract routine sites. And then, of course, I've mentioned it a few times all the way through here, is remove dead and dying rodents. So that is a massive thing. That's one of the main concerns for secondary poisoning, is the dead rats in the open and carrion feeders coming down and taking them, and foxes, things like that as well. It's not just the birds. So we don't want that to happen. We need to retrieve them. You can say to your customer as well, I'm coming back regularly, whatever that is, again, whatever you need to be doing. But can you keep an eye out? If you see any, give me a call. And again, note that in your treatment report. Ask the customer, keep an eye out themselves. Put it in if you've got a larger environmental risk assessment over here, write it in there. I've asked the customer to inform me if they see any rodents between my visits that are dead or dying, and I'll come and retrieve them. So that's some extra due diligence that you're doing there. Okay, moving on to post-treatments then. Again, you can read into more detail with this. I'm not here to go through the ins and outs of what you do post-treatment, but the things you've got to think about. So reinvasion, you've sorted a problem, you think you've got it under control. What's the likeliness of that infestation coming about again, and that being a reinvasion of rodents? Now, permanent baiting or long-term baiting is permitted in certain circumstances. There's a CRRU guidance note on permanent baiting. Really useful. If you have not read it, you need to go and read it, okay? If you're doing any form of long-term or permanent baiting, you need to go and read it. Great document. Get your CPD points as well, and make sure you're following that. But if there is a high risk of reinvasion on a site, and it's a site where you really cannot have the presence of rats in the area because they're producing food, or it's a pharmaceutical site or whatever, there's a high risk of reinvasion to a site of high risk in itself, then long-term or permanent baiting might be necessary. But the environmental risk assessment becomes absolutely critical. It's critical through the whole process. But if you're doing any form of permanent long-term baiting, you've got to have a corresponding environmental risk assessment with review dates, possibly. Again, it doesn't need to be every single visit you go. You don't have to put a review date on your environmental risk assessment every single time you turn up to site to do, long-term baiting visits. But you need to consider it, and at appropriate intervals review it, and record that you're doing that as well. Certainly if it is going on, a particularly long period of time. And I'm not here to talk about what situations really permanent baiting or long-term baiting would occur. That's another chat for another day, or a conversation on the phone if you ring me. I've got 12 questions I can see that have popped up there, so I'm going to move on, and we'll close out in the moment so we can get to those questions. But the last bit is the bait retrieval. So of course, I think we all know that. I mean, even before stewardship days, sort of problem out. Let's get rid of that bait. No longer needs to be there. That is an absolute no-no. You could get in some hot water if someone you don't want to be on your site is looking at what you're doing, and there's bait down and it's completely unnecessary. That is a real big cross in the box and a foul, shall we say? I'll put it politely. But bait retrieval, get it up, get it out of there. Okay. Right, well, there we go. That was a whistle-stop tour, wasn't it? But just to go over the fundamentals really quickly. So you've got to follow the hierarchy, do an environmental risk assessment on every single occasion, consider the environmental assessment. And I'm talking about treat, again, remember, it doesn't necessarily have to be the big, large document. But if you're doing it in here and you're doing rats outside and you're possibly using rodenticide or traps, write it on your treatment report. That's an environmental risk assessment, isn't it? Write it on there. I'm doing an environmental risk assessment. It's, because you are. I know most of you are. Comply with the label requirements. Of course, that's something we've had to do forever. And keep assessing your treatments. Don't just go, I'm going to do some permanent baiting here now, and I'll go back every now and then. And the baits haven't been eaten. Off I go, and back I come. I'm not saying you're doing that. I've probably done that. I got trained 20 years ago. 19 years ago, and the training, I say the training was very different. It was excellent training. It was just, very heavy on using rodenticides, monitoring with rodenticides, using them all the time, rodenticides. We just remember we need to keep assessing the treatments. Do we need that rodenticide down? If not, get rid of it. And then record activities. Okay. Doesn't need to be War and Peace, doesn't need to be an essay on everything you're doing. It just needs to demonstrate you're doing the things I think I know you're doing mentally already. Okay, I'm going to ask Kat to pop up the poll again for me. It might not have changed. I might just be like that. Oh, well, that was it's still nice to know what you guys have here. So I'm going to put the poll up, ask the question again. So after what you've heard, do you genuinely carry out a written, I should have put in there, environmental assessment every time you are required to? So every single time. Oh, we're getting more people. Oh no, it's up and down, it's up and down, it's up and down. Okay, we'll give it another couple of minutes, clicking away. We've got 310 with us now as well. A couple of you joined late. Who are you? I'll identify you. Might give you half a point. But yeah, we're going to get the poll there. We're doing it. Okay. Yeah. Slowing down a bit. And I think it's great. It's just interesting really for me. I'm being nosy. You know what I'm like? I'm nosy. But just to see whether or not, we're doing environmental risk assessments, definitely every site. But then actually when someone like me, shouts at you and goes, are you though? And gives you the detail, you might say, well, actually, yeah, maybe we're not. Maybe we need to do it a little bit more. And that's on me, it's on me or, the industry to, get that message across in a bit more of a clearer way. So I'm going to end the poll here. There's not a massive change, but there is a change. So we've gone from 61% of you doing an environmental risk assessment on every single job to 53%. So it's 8% did it. That's an 8% drop in. Actually, so 8% of you that said every single time have now gone, actually, maybe we're not doing it every single time we're supposed to. Not massive numbers. That's great. Still confident that 53% of you are like, yeah, I am absolutely doing that. And that's great to hear. For those of you that are not, listen, don't be down on yourself. Some of you may be really new to the industry, or possibly me babbling away, I've confused you, or anybody else, and you're like, actually, I didn't get that message maybe when I should have done, but I've got it now, hopefully. And please, if you are BPCA members, get in touch, give me a ring, say, right, Natalie, that webinar you done, you're babbling away. I want to ask you a bit more about that, and we can spend a bit more time talking about things that are affecting you and questions that you have. Okay, questions. So we have, I say we have 12 minutes left. We have however many minutes I'd like, really, don't we? So we've got 14 questions in here. Let's give it some go. I hope you haven't challenged me too much, so you're not like, let's give it a go. So do we need to carry out and record an environmental assessment for internal rodent control? So really great question. Again, it's detailed in the CRRU document, but you'll still be doing it here. And if you feel that there is no risk, generally there isn't, no, you don't need to record it. It's one, risk assessments are always done. We're always doing it. But there might be other internal issues like pets and things like that, and you're going to record that. So you will always do a form of risk assessment dynamically. And hopefully, like I've said, why not write on your treatment report? Oh, I've told the dogs to stay out the room. You're not told the dogs, because they won't know, will they? Told the owner of the dogs to keep the dogs out of the room. Write it there. But generally, yeah, of course, inside, in terms of secondary poisoning, there shouldn't be any risk unless you've got a rat problem outside or that you're dealing with, but they're also coming into the property and you're doing some baiting in there. Now, if you were to say, oh, I'm baiting inside, I don't need to environmental risk assess that bit, you just do it all together, wouldn't you? Because of course those rats can be traveling outside and possibly dying outside if they are coming from an external environment. But most of the time that's not an issue. Remember, we can only use rodenticides for house mice. The labels don't permit the use for field mice or anything like that. So you need to make sure you assess your species when you're doing mouse control, certainly inside. I say lower levels, any level, but you need to make sure you've got the right species there, because that could cause an environmental hazard. Because field mice live outside generally, don't they? They'll come in, have a little search around, look for a bit of food, maybe a bit of harbourage to pull out of some stuffing from somewhere and take it back outside. So if you've got a mouse control treatment going on for those mice that you're unaware that they're field mice that are going back outside, they're going to be dying outside, aren't they? Eating your bait, dying outside. And of course, that's a real issue for barn owls and alike. So no, recording environmental assessment for rodent control inside, generally, it's not something that would be considered necessary, but that is at your own judgment. And I say, note it in your treatment report anyway, that you've considered things, and why not do some trapping anyway? That's another topic for another day. Don't get too carried away, Natalie. Get too carried away. Stop it. Okay, so done that one there. What's the difference between permanent and long-term baiting? Are they not the same? So, good question. So long-term baiting, is longer term. It might be 2 months, 3 months, 4 months. And that there will be a end to that at some point, and that you will end that treatment at some point. It's just a particularly complicated issue, and you're having to take longer than, 28 days, 35 days or whatever to deal with it. That's kind of long term, because we're not talking about label statements and 35 days right now, because I could go on for a while. But generally, I think a lot of labels say that if you've had a rat problem for longer than 35 days using rodenticide, then maybe you need just to have a pause and wonder why. Okay, is there an underlying issue? Is there resistance? Are they actually eating my bait? Are they eating enough? Am I putting enough down? Is there a neighbouring site that's just feeding me and lots of rats? And all that, you need to consider these things, because just putting bait down, hoping for the best, and putting it down and putting it down and putting it down is a big problem. So we don't want to do that. So that 35-day rule people talk about is because it wants you to think about, if you're not getting control in 35 days, there might be something else you need to do or consider. So generally long-term baiting is when it goes over that and you've got to go into months, because there is a genuinely just larger issue that's going to take you longer. Whereas permanent baiting is, as it says on the label, it's a site that's got a really high risk of reinvasion of rats, and maybe it's a really high risk site. Again, food production or pharmaceutical, or it's got to be a sterile environment, and you really cannot have those rats anywhere near this building, then permanent baiting may be appropriate, where because you're getting an influx almost constantly. You can't control anything that's, there's farms all around you, there's, waste centres around you or whatever. There's lots of different situations that you can't control, and you say, well, I'm going to need permanent baiting here. So there is a definition. Read the CRRU document and it'll give you some more on that. So Martin here says, should we all be using cholecalciferol? My only concern is it's deadly to dogs, etc. So maybe unsuitable where pets are present. There's always a chance that rats will drag out half-eaten bait. So really good point. Again, it's been added into the CRRU document now. It's in terms of whether you consider it before second generation or first generation anticoagulants is your assessment. Secondary poisoning is, I'm told, almost, I say it's not zero, we don't ever want to say zero because I don't know, but from their studies, there is no risk to secondary poisoning. It doesn't work in the same way as anticoagulants do. However, the primary poisoning, as you mentioned, Martin, is a real issue. So you've got to weigh that up, site-specific. You obviously can't let anything other than the target animal get access to that. I mean, you can't do it with any of the products, but, there is no antidote. That's the issue there, is that anticoagulant, so vitamin K1 antidote, if dogs do congest it or cats or whatever, there is an antidote there that can be used, whereas cholecalciferol, there is no antidote that's around. So if a dog was to ingest a lethal Dose, it's yeah, bad times, should we say. So yeah, no, I'm not going to say you should all be using cholecalciferol. I'm not here to tell you what you need to use, when you need to use it. I'm happy, as I said, on an individual basis for people want to ring me and have a chat and say, Natalie, this is what's happening. This is what's going on. This is what I'm doing. This is why I want you to give your comment or whatever. And we'll have a chat about it. Absolutely. But for everybody's sake here, I couldn't possibly say whether or not you should be using cholecalciferol. It's really up to you. Of course, you need to be using non-toxic stuff first, but if you do move on to using rodenticides, then it's up to you. It's up to you. But there are pros and cons. Okay. And of course, you've got to prevent rats from dragging anything out of anything. Whether it's a burrow you've got it in, or whether it's the rodenticide, or whether it's a bait box, you've got to try and prevent that as much as you can. So do you have to carry out each step of the risk hierarchy before moving on to the next step? Absolutely. Yep. Again, I think I mentioned during this, you're not necessarily, going to be standing there for half an hour doing each section and each job you do, and you're going to be there for hours and hours. We do these things quite quick, don't we? As I said, there's a bush there, cut it down. There's a farm over there. Oh, okay, we need to address that. And there's a derelict bit of land there, so we need to get in touch with the local authority about that. And there's a hole over there, and there's a drain broken over there. You do all these things when we're going around, don't we? We do it quite quickly. So yeah, absolutely, you need to follow every step of the hierarchy, and you need to consider traps. And if traps are inappropriate, note it on your treatment report. I've used traps before; they don't work. A bit more detail on that. I don't know, trap shy maybe, or you've tried using traps before, caught non-target pet animals, so therefore you can't use them anymore. So you've moved on to maybe a rodenticide because it's going to mitigate those risks from using a trap. That can happen. So, but you need to consider every step. Absolutely. If you ever question on it, or it's in a court of law and you had lawyers fighting over whether you was right or wrong, they'll be asking you all these things and asking for evidence of it. Okay. So we do need to. Domestic pets, are they part of an ERA? Absolutely. They're mentioned. If we do rodenticide control outside, I have many phone calls from, be it pest professionals, albeit members of the public, worried because their dog has got hold of some bait outside in the garden, or domestic pets are absolutely part of it. So Matt here, i.e. trapping in the hierarchy. Note we use electric rat traps. I didn't mention the trade name there. Sorry, Matt, but I didn't. So trapping hierarchy. Note we use electric rat traps inside food warehouses to catch mice. Yes, the rat ones work really well for mice. Okay. They work great, especially for pallet mice. Oh, okay, pallet mice. Mice come into pallets. Oh, yeah. You've got a name for them, Matt. Pallet mice. Okay. So mice that come in on pallets that are brought into the warehouse, you use those traps each time. They work really well. And I had some feedback yesterday. I asked quite a common question to a group training that we had done at Pest Fix, and they, everyone was saying, actually, we are using traps a lot more. And they do work well. And okay, we might need to do more visits sometimes, or, a bit more attention to it. But, if you've got to do these things, you've got to consider it. And we need to have more value on the service that we deliver, and start talking to our customers about the skills and the what they're actually paying for. They're not paying for that poison. They're not paying for that trap. They're paying for us, for me, for you, to come in and sort their problem out. So they need to pay for that. But yeah, that's kind of off score. But Matt, great. In the trap hierarchy, you use those traps inside food warehouses to catch mice. So you said, the rat traps the mice. It works. What works for you works for you. Okay. So Tim here. Let's have a look. So is the risk hierarchy graphic different from the CRRU one? So the graphic is just taking the words out and put it into the into our own table, if you like, when we're doing the formatting. So of course, good point. So in terms of the risk hierarchy, the bits that we've taken out there, I think the hydrogen cyanide gas, I think you can use for buildings. I didn't think that was overly necessary to mention that, because we're talking about rats outside, and it very clearly says in there we don't, you can only use it for derelict buildings. So of course with gas, I think the aluminium phosphide in terms of there is mentioned. Was it not in that? I'll have to go back on that graph. I can't would have seen it, but we certainly took it out of there. But Kat and I have a look on that. So before. So in terms of using cholecalciferol or alpha chlorose before FGARs or SGARs, again, I did think that was saying on there, and it wasn't saying that you just really use them all before. It was more the considerations. But I'll have a look at that, Tim. I'll have a look at that and just see what that graph was. So Mohammed, is FGAR, SGAR better than cholecalciferol? Okay, so we sort of talked about that earlier with the last question. Again, up to you to do your own site survey and decide whether or not what's appropriate on your site. You know, whether you've got an issue, what you're dealing with, whether you need an FGAR, SGAR, or cholecalciferol, site specific. And again, I did mention about the secondary and primary poisoning differences. We're just coming to time here. I've got, oh God, blimey, I've got 18 questions in there. I'm certainly not going to get to all of those, but I will. So let's have a look. James here, can we place rodenticide in tamper-resistant mouse boxes outside for house mouse issues? We experience mouse issues in central London, external seating areas of restaurants where mice are active in and around the buildings. So that's a very detailed question. So I mentioned before with regards to environmental assessment and doing them, and sometimes the level of them or how often you do them can change whether you're in an urban or rural environment, because maybe you perceive the risks to be less. If you're using a product that says you can use in and around buildings, you can use it in and around buildings. If it says rats and mice or house mice on there, you can use them for rats and house mice. So take from that as you would wish, really. If you've got a bait that's got house mouse on the label and it says for in and around buildings, then I think you've answered your own question there. So yeah, that should be all good. Okay, fabulous. Yes, 1331. I think it's been a detailed webinar. There's lots more questions there. I'm going to get off and get those typed up and sent out on an email, and hopefully answer some more of the questions there. We've still got some coming in as well, so I might just leave it open for a moment. But anything, if I switch this off before you can get your question in there, pop us an email, and yeah, we'll do our best to have a look at it. And thank you for being here today. I know you're all busy. Great to see you. I'll say to see you, to hear your questions, and we'll catch up soon. All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.